Good morning, everyone. Dear friends, colleagues, and partners. I don't know where the partners are, but they should be there somewhere. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to this conference, the 32nd conference of ERF. I'm delighted to be back. I haven't been around for quite some time, but I guess you can't run away from something that you're stuck with for life. This is a very special conference, a very special event, for many reasons, actually. The first one is that this is really a time. Well, first of all, the conference has always been home for good things. It's the time of the year when ERF fellows and affiliates of all kinds get together to discuss things in a scientific, rigorous way, to discuss topics that are relevant for the region, to engage in peer reviewing and peer evaluation and build capacity to create good knowledge for the betterment of this region. So it has always been a good event to have. Every single time I have ever been party to, I have always had a great time, and I learned a great deal. It's also a time when the community gets together, because the ERF community is really a community of friends and colleagues, and you feel you belong. It's the place where you call home, sort of thing. So ERF annual conferences are always very special events for that reason. And over the years, for 32, no, actually since 93, somebody has to do the calculation, but 93. That's quite some time, and it's a resilient institution. It doesn't go away, it just grows better and better and better over time, thanks to all of you. So that's one reason to celebrate why we have that conference, or why we celebrate having that annual conference. But this year is even special. We have one more reason to celebrate having ERF. One, something that has to do with ERF itself, and something that has to do with the region. Let me elaborate just a tiny bit. ERF is like all individuals. There are ups and downs in the life of institutions, just like the ups and downs in the life of us individually. We go through good times, and sometimes we don't go through such a good times. But that's part of maturity. That's part of the deal. That's how we personally grow up. That's how institutions also grow up. And I think ERF is no exception. The fact that we have had some tough times at times is natural and acceptable and normal. The more important point is how to stand up, how to run, and how to make sure that you are on track and you are doing what you need to do and you do what you were created to do. And thanks to all of you. I have to admit that I was very, very impressed by how much you guys have been involved, engaged in making sure that ERF stays on track. The percentage of voting of the new board has been 75% of all fellows. Just to make the point that the previous count was only 21%. Pretty much people were not as engaged. They were not as interested. And I think when the time comes, people really get up in arms and make sure that they are getting ERF to be back on track and to continue to do what it's supposed to do. So I am very grateful to all of you for caring so much about ERF. And I also am grateful to our partners, because honestly, without support, we can get together and chat, but in fact, we may not even be able to get together because you need to pay for planes and hotels and for doing research and so on. So our partners are really important, and I would like to single out the Arab Fund, Ford Foundation, IDRC. I hope I'm not missing Shireen, that's Shishini. Huh? French Development Agency. You see, I am a very good student. I listen and I repeat what I hear. Ford Foundation I said already. What is this? I mean, you're giving me the wrong information, Shireen. Anyway, we have quite a few partners. I mentioned some of them and some I did not. but we are very, very grateful to all of them. So that is one reason why we are, I mean, a reason to celebrate. But the other reason is really the region, not us. The region is undergoing, as we all know, and as you will see throughout the next 3 days, is undergoing a major, is falling under a major shock. And this is the time when places like ERF can be very relevant and very useful. When you're under shock, you need to deal with it, you need to understand it, you need to identify the root causes, you need to work on it today, you need good advice from people who really care about the region. And I don't think there is a place, there is a better place where something like that could take place other than ERF. Let me conclude with mentioning one last reason why I believe we should deal with this celebrate this conference. And that is to celebrate one person who made it all possible. And that is my dear friend for the past, half a century, Heba Handousa. This woman single-handedly is the one who started everything. I mean, there were a few people who contributed at the beginning, Latif Al-Hamad, and I miss him so much. Actually, he's a very dear friend, and he has been a great guy for ERF. But Heba was the first managing director of ERF. And when the time got tough, when things got tough, when things really were not working very well, who would step in to take the lead and to fill the vacuum and to basically hold us by the hands once more is also Heba Handousa. So she is our first managing director, and she is our before last managing director. So Heba was very generous and very kind, and I really am grateful to her for coming in to play the role of the interim managing director for the past, what is it, Yashirin? Year or less, for a whole year. She agreed to do it for free, by the way. I'm hoping that everybody will follow suit, including our new managing director. He should be working for free as well. So Heba has been generous consistently throughout. I have just taken his salary away. Heba has been really the person to whom we went to and relied on and counted on more than anybody in this room or outside this room. So thank you, Heba, so very much. Okay, my intro turned out to be a little longer than I planned, honestly. And as you can see, I don't prepare something written, and so apologies for that. The rest of the panel, what we are going to do is the following. It's really an opening panel, so it's supposed to be saying hi, and then we will get into the business of the conference next. First, Dr. Hala Saeed would say a few words. Then that will be followed by Dr. Raed, our new managing director, will say a few words. And then we will present a nice gift to Dr. Heba Handousa. So now, Dr. Hala Saeed, I don't think anyone needs an introduction of Dr. Hala. They gave me, by the way, a short CV, but if I were to read it, I would take as much time as I have taken so far. So I am just going to say that she is currently, well, first of all, she's a member of the board of the Economic Research Forum, and we are delighted to have her. She is also the advisor to the President of the Republic, President Sisi. And before that, she did everything else under the sun. She was the Minister of Planning, or what is it, economic development, I think, and administrative development. And, every time they enlarged the portfolio of the Ministry of Planning, and under Rania, it got even bigger. And anyway, so, before that, of course, she was the dean of the Faculty of Economics and Political Science at Cairo University, and otherwise, she's a very good friend. And she has been holding the two sides of the story. On one hand, she's an academician, and she came from the academic community. But at the same time, she was in the position of policy making. In a way, her perspective on what to expect out of ERF in the new era and new age is something we value and would like to hear her take on it. So, Dr. Hala, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, dear friends. First of all, I'd like to sincerely express my appreciation and grateful of being a board member at the prestigious think tank like the ERF and being among a community that has been dedicated for 3 decades now or more in thoughtful analysis, meaningful dialogue, and policy reform. So getting to your question, Dr. Ahmed, as you have mentioned clearly, the world has been hit during the past few years by multiple external shocks. These multiple external shocks had different consequences on the world and definitely on our region. And the region had to absorb the combined impacts of the Ukraine war, the repeated escalations in Gaza, and the continuous tension that we are all witnessing between Iran, the US, and the rest of the region. This means that the region is basically no longer managing an isolated crisis, but basically what we call the region is operating in a sort of a systemic stress test. It is managing one crisis after the other, and these crises are cascading simultaneously through trade routes, through shipment and insurance costs, increases in prices of strategic commodities like food, energy, affecting negatively investment, tourism. So basically, the MENA region is suffering a lot of negative implications. And as we all know as economists, the shocks do not fall equally on all the citizens and on all the society. Shocks tend to impact mostly the part of the economy or the segments of the economy that are most exposed, like the female, unfortunately, young generations, informal workers, the more vulnerable groups and segments of the society. And this is being reflected in interrupted education, lost jobs, more people falling into vulnerable segments of the population. And definitely, it also has a negative impact on the macro level, on the economy's reserve, foreign exchange reserves, on its investment climate, and its debt sustainability. If we look into the global framework, the World Economic Forum has described this age as the age of competition. The age of competition because countries tend to compete by using instruments like trade, like capital, and technology that should be used as instruments of cooperation. They are using these instruments as instruments of geopolitical leverage. And this is definitely making a lot of tension. Rather than the geopolitical tension that we are facing, it's putting a lot of pressure and a lot of tension. So in this environment of global shocks, we cannot control definitely the global challenges like global capital flows, like global supply chain and global tariffs, but we can, for sure, control how credibly and consistently we respond to these challenges. And if you look into, for example, Egypt's trajectory, we will find that basically if we look into the coherent architecture of policies, we need alignment of flexible exchange rate of the monetary policy, fiscal consolidation, and structural reforms. These three policies have to be properly aligned and sequenced. So what do we need? We need proper evidence. Governments cannot reform on something that they don't understand and cannot measure something they do not assess properly. And here comes the need of credible evidence. And this is the main role of an institution like the ERF, to provide governments and policymakers with credible evidence, with data analysis that policymakers need in order to have the proper reform and the proper policies that are aligned and coordinated in a coherent manner. Definitely in times of crisis, the scarcest resources are not investment, are not capital. They are credible evidence. And this is where an institution like the ERF is very important in these times of crisis and these times of geopolitical tension, especially when we have this sort of restructuring of an institution that has been for 3 decades helping policymakers and bridging the gap between scholars and policymakers and helping mentoring economists. And I think this is the most precious investment that makes our MENA region resilient, is investing in the region's economists during the past 3 decades. So, in fact, shocks, external shocks may continue and may end, but the issue is whether we emerge from these shocks more fragile or more resilient. And of course, we cannot choose better than the ERF as a think tank to make the economy more resilient. Just to add a few points, in the detour of the institution, I have been, and as I mentioned, I am grateful and honored to be on the board of the ERF. I have witnessed how tedious we're following up on all details. A new finance committee have been developed. A new governance committee have been developed to make sure that as we want the economy to be resilient, we want the institution also to be sustainable and resilient to support our economy in the region. Thank you, Dr. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hala, for these very thoughtful and encouraging comments. Now we turn to what we call the Aris of the conference. You know, Aris is, what is it, Shireen? Shireen is one I resort to whenever I get stuck. That's the groom. Now, I'm not sure what to say about Raed, because everybody knows Raed. I mean, he has been around for quite some time, so have I. And I think we kind of know each other quite well. You know him very, very well. He has been around. He has done almost everything I can think of. He has been with the World Bank. He has been with OECD. And he moved to Dubai and created his own consulting thing. But throughout, he has been a member, an active, energetic member of the community of ERF. And I think the last qualification is probably the best one. Sorry, right. If I were to say anything about, one thing about Raed, he is a moving energy. Everywhere he goes, you feel the place is shaking. He moves, he's energetic, he's too much, to the point where I say, right, calm down, tranquille-toi, my friend. So anyway, I am really, really delighted that Raed has accepted to be the managing director of ERF, and we all very much look forward to his serious contribution to get this place to be what it really should be. Raed, the floor is yours.
Oh, all right. Colleagues, friends, thank you very much for this lovely introduction. It is a great honor for me to address you today for the first time as Managing Director of the Economic Research Forum. This is not an ordinary moment for me. So allow me to take you very quickly, very, very quickly down memory lane. When I think back to the ERF annual conference, what stays with me is not only the papers or the sessions, but the sense that something larger was being built. An intellectual home for the region, grounded in evidence, open to debate, and committed to giving regional voices a stronger role in shaping better policy. At that time, back in 1993 when Hiba founded ERF, ERF was young, and so was I. It did not, at that time, ERF did not have the institutional depth, network, or recognition that it enjoys today. But it had something equally important. It had belief. Belief that rigorous research mattered. Belief that scholars working on the region could speak to its problems with authority. Belief that economic policy in our part of the world should be informed by evidence, not only by instinct, ideology, or external advice. I remember the sense that we were merely attending a conference. We were helping build a home. Over the years, many of us returned to that home again and again as researchers, presenters, discussants, critics, friends, and colleagues. For many in this room, ERF was not just where papers were presented. It was where professional identities were formed, networks were built, and a shared commitment to better policy took root. This is why standing before you today is deeply personal. My relationship with ERF goes back more than 3 decades. I have engaged with this institution as a researcher, contributor, colleague, member of its community, and beneficiary of the intellectual space it has created for those working on the economic challenges of our region. So today is not simply the beginning of a new professional responsibility for me. It is a return to an institution that has helped shape economic policy in the region, and to a community I have long admired and felt part of. And when one is entrusted with an institution of this importance, one does not begin with plans. One begins with gratitude. Gratitude to the Board of Trustees for their confidence and trust. I am grateful for the responsibility you guys have placed in me, and fully aware of the duty that comes with it. Again, gratitude to Dr. Ahmed Galal, who has given so much of his intellectual energy, leadership, and personal commitment to building and sustaining ERF over many years, and who continues till today to serve the institution with dedication as chair of the board. And third, to Dr. Hiba Handousa, Professor Hiba Handousa, who once again, let me remind you, she founded ERF in 1993 and served as its first managing director. Hiba, your vision, leadership, intellectual commitment, all of it helped create the institution whose community we are all part of today. I am grateful for your wisdom, your advice, your continued service, including most recently as interim managing director. I also want to thank the ERF team. They're all here. Institutions are often recognized through what the public sees: their conferences, research, partnerships, and policy contributions. But they are sustained by what is less visible: the hard work, professionalism, and loyalty of people behind them. I am grateful to each one of you. Thank you. And of course, I want to thank the researchers, fellows, associates, partners, donors, and friends of ERF. You are not simply participants in this conference. You are the institution. This conference takes place, as we just heard, at a moment very different from previous moments in the region's economic history. For many years, the region's policy debate was framed across familiar questions: growth, jobs, fiscal sustainability, trade, investment, poverty, inequality, informality, education, and governance. These questions remain central, but the context in which we ask them has changed profoundly. The region is no longer dealing with isolated shocks. It is facing overlapping and persistent disruptions, conflict and fragility, climate stress, food and energy insecurity, debt pressures, technological change, demographic pressures, trade fragmentation, and weakening confidence in traditional development models. But at the same time, the region is not only a space of vulnerability, it is a space of possibility. There are countries undertaking major reforms. There are young people demanding opportunity. There are firms trying to compete in difficult environments. There are governments searching for new growth models. And there are researchers from the region and beyond producing evidence that can inform better choices. And there are regional institutions, the ERF, that can help translate complexity into clearer policy direction. This is why this moment is different for ERF as well. So what do I believe this means going forward for ERF as I begin my new responsibility? I will speak about this in more detail later today during the Research Fellows meeting. But let me first offer the headlines here. First, ERF must remain the region's trusted home for independent, policy-relevant economic research. Second, our agenda must speak directly to the structural transformations reshaping the region: jobs, productivity, trade, technology, fiscal resilience, climate adaptation, and social cohesion. Third, we must invest more deliberately in data, methods, and research infrastructure, because better evidence begins with better foundations. Fourth, we must engage policymakers more directly, not by compromising academic rigor, but by making rigorous work more accessible, timely, and usable. Fifth, we must strengthen ERF's training and capacity building role, especially for researchers, analysts, and public policy officials, working at the interface of evidence and policy. And finally, ERF must remain what it has always been at its best: a serious, open, and generous intellectual community, one that debates rigorously, disagrees respectfully, supports younger scholars, and keeps the region's long-term development interest at the center of its work. This annual conference is therefore more than a gathering. It's an opportunity to renew our collective purpose. The theme of this conference, Reform, Resilience, and Economic Transformation, captures exactly the challenge before us. The region needs reform because old models are no longer sufficient. The region needs resilience because shocks are no longer temporary interruptions. The region needs transformation because stability without opportunity will not be enough. My commitment is to work with you all to ensure that ERF rises to this moment, to honor what has been built, to learn from what it has been difficult, and to move forward with seriousness, humility, and ambition. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raed, very much. Very well said. And we will hold you accountable to every word you said today. So this is not just wording, it's really, as you said, you are assuming a big responsibility, and ERF is really up to a challenge, and I am sure collectively we'll make it work. I want to come to the conclusion of this opening ceremony, and we always say we save best to last. And the best to last is celebrating and thanking and expressing our deep appreciation to our dear friend, Heba Handousa, without any, I don't need to say professor or former managing director, she's everything that we all care about. Heba, thank you so much indeed. I don't know.
Been a wonderful journey since we started, and I think some of the elements that are making a difference today is the extent to which we were generous with what we call the Middle East, having involved Turkey, having involved Iran, were, I think, blessings, because after all, this is our strength as a region and not as a group of Arab countries plus. I also think that the exchange between the countries has been of enormous value to all of us. We learn from each other. Very, very successful experiences that we try to share and imitate, and we beg to get all the information on how to do it. And I can't think of another similar institution across the world that does better than ERF. So thank you to everybody who's attached to ERF and loves ERF like I do.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Heba. That was emotional. let's move on. I'm sorry we're a bit behind schedule, but by about 10 minutes. That's why we just need to move on. I would like to invite Her Excellency Dr. Rania Al-Mashad to join me on the podium. And I'm assuming that we have the other two panelists virtually. Dr. Jihad Azur and Dr. Nasser Saidi. Are they with us? They are. I apologize to both of you for being a little late. I blame it on Raed, and everything that goes wrong is going to be Raed's responsibility from now onward. Everything that's good belongs to you, and he's the one who gets the blame. Now, the first session is about the war in the Middle East and the ramifications of that war, and what kind of advice policymakers, based on knowledge and evidence, can they give to policymakers to deal with these adverse consequences that we are all living in. There are three things that are really important to remember in dealing with an important topic of this kind. It's not a joke, it's for real. First, I would argue that crises are the new normal. They are not the exception. That's number one. If you think about it, from the mid-70s, 73, we had the oil shock. Then afterwards, we had a series of events, from COVID-19 to the Ukraine-Russian war to the financial crisis of 2008, and currently the war that we are all experiencing firsthand between, on the one hand, the US and Israel and Iran. Wars, external shocks are the new normal. That's the first statement I want to make. Second statement I want to make, without elaboration because I'm only moderating the panel, is that the impact, as Dr. Hala mentioned actually in her intervention, the impact of the war is not only on people within countries, but even among countries. Some countries generally are able to absorb, adapt, deal with the consequences of these crises on the economic front, and some are not. So the interesting question there is what makes the distinction between these two groups of countries? So that's the second point I want to make. Third point I want to make is that perhaps crises and external shocks kind of represent a challenge and an opportunity to uncover the weaknesses that countries have. And the real question there is, what is it that countries can do? This is where the policy making and policy formulation come in handy. What can they do to get themselves ready to weather any shock that may come their way? I believe these are three key ideas our great panelists are going to address in their own way. Each of them will come to it from their perspective angle. And I would like to start with Her Excellency, Dr. Rania Al-Mashad. Rania is not she is one of us. Sure, she went to government and she actually is going everywhere. It's hard to keep up with her. Her current job, this is her first appearance in public as, what's it called? Deputy General Under Secretary of ESCO, something like that. Is that correct? Did I get it right? No. You will correct it when you take the floor. And before that, she was the Minister of Planning and International Development and Economic Development, and then she was also Minister of Tourism, and she was the Minister of International Cooperation. And before that, she was with the IMF, with the Central Bank. That's what I mean when I say that she's been everywhere. We expect a lot from you, Rania, in your new position, and I am certain that you will do as well as always. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, and it's a pleasure to be here at ERF, and I'm very, I couldn't find a better platform to start as the UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCWA better than ERF. And maybe I start my words by recognizing Professor Hiba Handousa and saying that she has always been an inspiration for each and every economist in the region, but also particularly for females. I think the number of times I mentioned Dr. Hiba at home is more than the times I mentioned Adam Smith. So this is, again, a testament to how much you have inspired and shaped us. And I also want to declare I was the first summer intern for ERF in 1994. So also among the founding members of ERF, I just find it extremely a relevant institution. And as head of ESCWA, and we'll maybe be talking about that later, how we can actually, with the new managing director, and congratulations, Ra'id, for taking on this position at this time. There's so much that the region needs and expects from its own people. The voice of the region is very, very important, both at the regional level, but also at the global level. I'm also very pleased to be with Jihad and Dr. Nasser Saidi in this panel. I can't see them, but I know that they're there, and I'm sure that we will be complementing one another in terms of our insights. When Dr. Ahmed had a discussion with us as panelists, he asked us 3 questions. What are the facts from what's happening in the region? The second is, what's the response? And the third is how we can safeguard. And so as I walk through my intervention, those are the 3 points that I want to talk about. So again, as he mentioned in his introduction, for years we've treated shocks as interruptions. That's not the case anymore. Shocks are not interruptions in economic activity. And if there is anything which is characterized as the new normal, it is that we live in a world of uncertainty and the policy responses are nonlinear. So there are 2 words that define our new normal: uncertainty and nonlinearity. And these have tremendous implications on each and every policy front. The other element, when we think about the region, it is a region beyond the war. We're not talking about one conflict. This is, again, across the different economies, we see that these conflicts have a human face, have a human implication, whether it's displacement of people, whether it's services which are interrupted, households which are affected. So whenever we think about recovery, the test is really to see how individuals, households get this recovery. It's not just a policy diagnostic or a policy tool, but it's really testing ourselves at the policy level. The other element which, again, sort of links directly to the region is that geography is definitely back. And that is the transmission channel that we have today is not necessarily physical. It's not because you live in a region that you're affected by it. Actually, the transmission is, all over. And when we think about the implications of where of these conflicts, these implications did not, create additional fragility. Actually, it just exposed where we are today. So this is, again, another important point, that the war did not create the region's exposure, but it actually revealed the architecture. And when we take a look at the Strait of Hormuz, it is very concrete. We have oil prices above, growing more than 40%. We see the insurance risk going up. So all of this means that geography is not dead. On the contrary, the insulation geographically is what no longer exists. And therefore, when we take a look at the region more closely, we find that different countries are starting with different initial conditions, and therefore the responses are asymmetric. It's not a region that is equal, but we have countries that had buffers, others that did not. And therefore, it's quite important to take that into account. This slide just represents some of the the key outcomes or the key issues related to this shock. And if we go next and think about the recovery or the response, we would find that the some of the statistics, and these are the facts that Dr. Ahmed was talking about. We have 82 million people in this region that need humanitarian assistance. This is a number, a big number. And this goes from 59 million in 2018. So that's quite significant. The region also hosts more than a quarter of the world's internally displaced people and 1 in 5 refugees globally. These are all important facts to the realities we're living in. And they're not statistics. These are lives which are interrupted and public systems which have been pushed beyond capacity. And if we take a look at Lebanon, which is the headquarter of ESWA, we will find that with UNDP, there's an analysis that shows that 2 in 3 children have been out of school, and this will continue until there's a ceasefire, and 1 out of 7 firms closed. So these are immediate reactions, but they have durable and persistent implications. So that's something which is quite telling. So now when we think about the response, one of the key elements in the response is that there's not a single model to deal with the damage, but the key for any response has to be how to protect human dignity. And lives, livelihoods, basic services, when we think, and I think that the initial, or the name of this session is the scarring, right? So there are visible scars, and the visible scars you see in the tents, you see in the displaced, children who are not going to school, and then there are the invisibles. How much unemployment has taken place? How much firms have dropped? So all of these shocks are not just they are not domestically generated, but again, when we take a look at the implications, they are very much regional. And also another element is the only way to be able to recover this is not through domestic resources only or domestic policy only, but there is a regional element to that. And of course, international cooperation and multilateralism should play a role, and that's in any agenda that we think about should be there. And for those who know me quite well, know that this is a real conviction, and I think ERF can also play a very important role in that light. Something else is a framework of discipline. You talk about policy. And when we think about policy, we should think about discipline, we should think about data, we should think about also dialogue. So there are 8 Ds that really define what a framework for engagement should look at, and I'll be talking about that in general. But to sum up the response, when we are responding to this shock, and these shocks, as I mentioned, are continuous, echoing previous speakers, it is that we should not have a choice between stability and protection. It should not be a very quick response for a crisis without an eye on the medium to long-term policies. We should not be actually ignoring that initially, before the crisis, we had close to 10% only spending of GDP on health, education, and social protection, whereas the global average was 17%. Definitely these numbers are worse because of where we are today, and therefore, as we are thinking about prioritizing policy and spending, it should be on what creates a compounded value, and that is education, health, and social protection. The next and the final point that Dr. Ahmed mentioned to us as panelists was, how do we safeguard reform? How can we create that resilience? And we are often asked, that resilience is not the return to normal before the shock, because as we mentioned, before the shock, we already had a very fragile state, but it is the capacity to keep on functioning while the exposure persists, and to keep on reforming despite the exposure. Most of the countries have their economic plans or reforms when thinking that times are tranquil or that ceteris paribus, but that's not the case. So this is the new normal, the uncertainty and the nonlinearity. And resilience is once again functioning when, with this exposure that does exist. And when we estimate that, and we have some estimates in ESWA that there are some efficiency gaps which generate resources for the region. We're talking about efficiency gaps in public spending that could actually generate, if addressed, around $100 billion a year. And this could be the financing which goes to the sectors of priority, as I mentioned, health, education, and so forth. And then the other element which I want to emphasize when we think about the region is that you know, it's not just at the border that we are able to solve issues, because within country borders you may not have enough resources, but it's really a regional, there's a regional element and a regional answer that can actually provide input. And I give some examples. If we're thinking about the energy routes within the region, if we're thinking about the electricity grids, if we're thinking about the labor that is able to move among countries, all of these are additions. It's 1 + 1 = 3, if we put it in that sense. So again, inside a single border is not enough, and that's where the regional aspect comes in. And we have very good examples also in terms of safeguarding, such as diversification that Morocco has with respect to what it did in its manufacturing. It also was one of the first countries to adopt cash transfers to protect population from crises when it comes to some of the shocks related to fuel. We have the Gulf, which is very much invested in data sciences, frontier technologies, which is another element of diversification. And I hope that this is an agenda that we can share together here at ERF. So again, there are many examples of where on a regional scale we can work. Just in terms of the Commission or ESCWA itself, it is a very important convening element for the region, and I look forward to engaging further with member states and also with the different research in the region. But again, if a region cannot know exactly what's happening within, it becomes very difficult to move forward. So that is one of the elements. This is the 8 disciplines, or the 8 Ds that I mentioned: data, disclosure, demography, and the common denominator is really the people of the region. And the final point is the destination. Where does all of this land? And as I mentioned, if the reform does not land on the people themselves, then we have a very big issue. I will conclude with this, and this is looking inside one border, which is a country border. Maybe the math would not always close. There's a regional layer for this. A grid does not only have a single state that can build it alone. Also, water is the same, corridor, gas interconnection. So there is a very big opportunity to work regionally to be able to fend off or actually create opportunity and mitigate the permanent scarring, which is the lower potential output because of the consecutive conflicts that we have in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rania. I am going to move on without any further ado on my part to Dr. Jihad Azur. He is currently the director of the Middle East and Central Asia Department. He's Lebanese, he's our friend, and he was a former minister of finance in Lebanon, in addition to several other posts, including being in the private sector. So Jihad brings in quite a bit of knowledge, and now being at the IMF, also the authority. So Jihad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I hope you hear me well.
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Can you? I can hear him well. Can everybody hear him well? Yes.
Thank you very
Please
much.
go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I would like also if the presentation can be put on the screen if possible. Thank you. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you on your 32nd annual conference. And I would like to congratulate Raed for his new responsibility, as well as also Rania for her new mission at the UN. We are, as many of you mentioned in the beginning, in the first session and in this session, we are in an exceptionally uncertain moment. More than 100 days have passed since the outbreak of the war on February 28th. This conflict has delivered a severe shock that is similar to some of the very few shocks that comes one in a century, to one of the main strategic economic corridor in the world. The Strait of Hormuz, the single most consequential choke point for energy in the world, where 70% of 30% of natural gas, 20% of oil, almost 30% of fertilizers are being shipped. Therefore, it's an important economic shock, not only to the region, but also to the world economy. What I would like in the presentation is to answer, Ahmed, your three questions. What we are seeing today, what is the magnitude of the shocks? What are the channels of transmissions of the shock? How countries are coping with it? And what are the policy priorities in this context? Of course, and maybe we can move to the next slide. Okay, I'll try to assess the shock in three dimensions. One, the impact on energy prices, inflation, and financial conditions. Saying that, as it was mentioned by you, Ahmed, it's not the only shock that we are facing. Over the last 5 years, both the global environment and the regional situation has changed fundamentally. In 5 years, 5 main shocks struck our economy. COVID crisis that ended just in time, the war in Ukraine, that was the first gas crisis, the war in Gaza and the closure of the Bab el-Mandeb in 2023, the tariff shock in 2025, and now the outbreak of the war in the Gulf. 5 shocks in 5 years, and those constitute one of the major transformation or major shock to what the world economy and the regional economy has went through. If we take them individually, they are significant. Taken together, they have fundamentally going to reorder how we think about trade routes, energy security, and economic integration. As you see in this slide, in 2026, we, as we do usually, we have our reference forecast. We were forecasting the economy to be in a situation where oil price will be at $82. That inflation will remain anchored despite the shock, and we will see some financial tightening. But given the high level of uncertainty, we had also to add 2 new scenarios to that. An adverse scenario whereby we expect oil price to reach $100 and where inflation could be mildly de-anchored and countries need to do more tightening. And the last one is in case the shock lasts for a longer period and the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. We, in the third scenario, we expect oil price to reach $110 with some moderate de-anchoring and with significant tightening. And those 3 scenarios, in fact, led us to a bit define what are the policy priorities. Next, please. What can we say now, almost 114 days after the outbreak of the war? First of all, the direct effect of higher end gas prices on activity and inflation remained relatively stable. We saw some volatility in oil price, and somewhere we were between the reference scenario and the adverse scenario. However, the increase in gas price that we saw since the outbreak of the war is relatively mild compared to what we saw back in 2022 with the war in Ukraine. Therefore, impact on oil and gas prices is there, but it's still relatively muted. Next slide, please. If we turn to inflation, we see that price pressure are mounting in several advanced as well as also emerging economies, though core inflation is less affected compared to what we have feared in the beginning. The shock has fed into higher headline inflations in many economies. However, the PMI did not really point toward rising. Also, when we look at the second chart, the chart on the right, we see that inflation expectations remain relatively anchored. Therefore, we had price pressure, but this price pressure did not translate into core inflation that was less affected, and inflation expectations remain anchored. The second channel of transmission is the financial conditions. This is what we see in the next slide. As we see in this slide, credit and sovereign spreads increased in the first months of the war, but since they have dropped, and in certain cases we are even below where we were before the outbreak of the crisis. In terms of financial conditions, also we saw some tightening in the financial conditions, but they have loosened again, and the risk assets have rallied in the last couple of months. Therefore, we saw increase in oil prices, relatively limited compared to what was feared between the reference scenario and the adverse scenario in terms of inflation. We see headline inflation, yet we don't see core inflation moving. And in terms of financial conditions, after the first phase of high volatility, we see a certain convergence. Turning to the region, which I think is also one of your key questions. We saw economic activity, as we see in the next slide, slowing, and inflation is on the rise. But countries have demonstrated resilience. First of all, confidence of business community has declined, as we see with the PMI across the region that has dropped since February. However, we still see in certain number of countries that PMI is still above 50%, which means that although there is drop in business confidence, but in certain number of countries is still relatively benign. The chart on the left shows us that the main key sectors that were affected were trade and tourism. And countries, especially in the GCC, who have diversified their economy outside oil, and where they were directly hit by the conflict, their tourism sector was the most affected. Inflation began to rise, especially among the oil importing countries and those who allowed the pass-through of increase in commodity prices to their final price. If we look at, in the next slide, impact or the channel of financial transmission, we see here that financial conditions have remained benign since April. And this is despite the continuation of the conflict. We saw some exchange rate movement, but it remained modest compared to what we saw in previous episodes. On the other hand, government across the region adopted a mix of emergency measures, especially financial sector support measures, in order to cushion the conflict that you see on the right chart. And several countries have resorted to some measures to prevent greater price increases. Therefore, here again, we see that the region is not uniform. Those who are at the epicenter were directly affected, the GCC country plus Iraq plus Iran. The rest, the transmission of the shock was through the traditional channels, the price effect and the effect of transfer, especially in terms of remittances and the financial situation. Your second question is, what can one say for the rest of the year or for the short term and the medium term? And here, if we move to this next slide, we see the following, that this is what I have presented in the beginning, 3 channels of transmission, 3 scenarios. Where do we stand today? We are in a situation where the oil price is hovering around $88. Today it was 86. Inflation remained anchored globally with some tightening of monetary policy, as we saw with the ECB this week. And financial conditions tighten, but remain relatively benign compared to what we would have feared in the beginning. However, the picture, as we see in the following slide, is different when we look at the region. Even if the scenario, the reference scenario is still valid, MENA countries were directly affected by the conflict will see significant impact. And those are mainly Gulf countries and the countries who were affected, like Lebanon, by the war itself. Growth have been revised downward in certain cases like Qatar, Iran, and Iraq, above 8% negative growth. While on the other hand, countries like Oman or Saudi only will have a mild downward revision of their growth forecast. And this is because they had the ability to redirect trade, especially on the oil and gas. For Saudi, using the East-West pipeline and using the ports on the Red Sea. Oman, because it's relatively less affected and has access to the sea outside the Strait of Hormuz. However, over the medium term, we will see persistent effect of the shock. And in terms of recovery, countries on average will recover slower, as we see in the chart in the middle, especially the red line, that in general, countries will recover in a slower pace, and this war will have a long-lasting impact. Mind you that prior to the war, the outlook for the region was strong, and we were revising upward our growth projections. On the inflation side, the picture here is mixed. We are expecting some increase in inflation, especially in countries that are directly affected. Iran, Bahrain, and Qatar are the countries that are most hit in terms of inflation. You have asked us to look at what is the impact on some of the country groups. And I would like to highlight two groups that are directly or indirectly affected. The first one is the GCC countries where they are at the epicenter of the war, where a big chunk of their oil and gas production has been affected. And the other one is fragile and conflict states and low-income countries. In the next slide, we see that for those economies, countries who have over the last decade accelerated their diversification outside oil, this conflict will have an impact on the non-oil sector. The tourism sector that has become in certain economies an important one, contributing for more than 10% of GDP, will be affected. And a certain number of scars will need to be addressed in a certain number of activities. Financial services that represent also a big portion of the strategy of those economies could be directly affected.
Jihad, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Jihad, may I interrupt you for 1 second? Could you please speed up a little bit?
Yes, sure.
Two more minutes to go.
Sure.
Thank you.
In the next slide, we see that low-income countries and fragile states, although they are not directly affected, but they are affected by the food and energy prices that constitute more than 30% of their import, and also because of their high dependence on import for the supply of their basic commodities. Therefore, food fertilizers will have a big impact on the performance of the economic activities for fragile and conflict states. Moving to the last section, which is the policies. Of course, next line, several countries will have to deal with important policy choices on the fiscal side, because this conflict, especially for the oil importers, will have an impact on their current account, as well as also on their fiscal situation that could range between 0.2% and 1.2% of GDP, depending on the situation of the countries. When it comes to the oil exporting countries, as we see on the right, the situation depends on their capacity to export. And here, the speed at which the Strait of Hormuz will open up will have a big impact on the capacity of those countries to regain access to market and to recover the loss in terms of revenues, as well as also in terms of current account that they are facing currently. In this slide, in the next slide, we see here that the main challenge for those countries is going to be how to deal with energy subsidies. And also for countries who have high level of debt, the way to manage a fiscal stability at a time where interest rates are high, and any increase in interest rate will have large impact on their financial and fiscal sustainability, and the way to have the right balance between fiscal and monetary policy if there is a peak in inflation, as we saw in a certain number of countries. Very quickly, in the next slide, the policies that have been implemented benefited from the experience of COVID. A few countries have implemented some targeted fiscal measures. And also, we saw a certain number of measures on the financial sector side that were used in order to reduce the direct impact, especially in oil exporting countries. When it comes to monetary policy, the communication of policy was an important element to stabilize. Countries who have flexible exchange rate used it, and countries who have fixed exchange rate regime, they need to maintain a high level of reserves. Financial sector was regularly tested, and countries have strengthened their safeguard in terms of liquidity and supervision. My last point, and I would conclude with it, is the long-term effect. Our studies, and this is in the last slide, shows that any shock that we are seeing, especially this one, will reverberate for a long period, raising fundamental questions about the long-term economic strategy. And therefore, 3 questions are before us. How might this war change MENA economy diversification strategy? I think it's an important element that was raised by several of us in this session. Second, does this war bolster the case of greater regional economic integration on, of course, on new basis and for new future? And how might countries enhance energy and food security and to continue to address the geopolitical instability that we are in? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Jihad, and I'm sorry I had to push a little bit because we want to get going. We have one more speaker and the floor will be open for discussion. And since we started 10 minutes late, I'm going to borrow the 10 minutes from the next session, whatever that may be. Now, the merit of listening to Jihad, I mean, most of us would obviously expect that the shock would create inflationary pressure, would slow down GDP and fiscal spaces and the tension and the debt and so on. But the beauty of the IMF and what Jihad has told us is that they dare to put numbers on these things. So rather than just making broad, logical, sensible statements about what the consequences are or would be, they have a little army that kind of puts pieces together and they come up with exact numbers. So thank you, Jihad, for your contribution. That was a real addition in many ways. Last but certainly not least is my dear friend Nasser Saidi. Dr. Saidi now is the president of Nasser Saidi and Associates. He couldn't find another name, so he just stick with his name. Nasser is someone I have known also for a very long period of time, and he has done also too many things, including being deputy governor of a central bank in Lebanon, and he was the minister, I think, of economy. Is that correct? Is that correct, Nasser?
Industry, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to elaborate. He's someone who brings in a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge and a lot of insights. He is going to tell us, give us his take on the issues at hand. Nasser, the floor is yours.
And just a few words to thank you for inviting me, Ahmed. We've been together.
It was Raed, not me. I mean, so thank Raed, please.
I'm going to get around to Raed and Dr. Rania, but just to say that I was there at the inception with Dr. Hiba. So congratulations on the 32nd anniversary or 33rd. And congratulations to Dr. Rania on her new appointment. She'll be in Beirut living what we are living in Lebanon. And Dr. Raed is a friend from old days, so congratulations, Raed, on your new appointment. I'm going to share my presentation. If everyone can see that.
Yeah, yes, we do. Go ahead.
So we've had already very good discussions from Jihad and Dr. Rania, yourself, Ahmed, to phrase it. I'm going to focus more really on how do you build resilience and focusing really on structural rather than other aspects. So if you look at the transmission channels and the shocks, there are really 7 distinct ones which are impacting the region, but also globally. Energy prices, of course, but energy prices, of course, translate into production prices, eventually transport, and of course, eventually into consumer prices. And we're having an impact on transit routes across the board. The second one is the terms of trade shock, particularly for oil importers. This is massive. What we're talking about, this is the biggest energy crisis we've had in the past 40 years, if not longer. So we know that oil price shocks from the IMF, they tell us that every 10% increase in oil prices reduces growth in the MENA countries by about 0.5%. So we're likely, and we've seen that with Jihad's numbers right now. Food and fertilizer prices have been rising because a lot of fertilizers come through the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. But the impact there is not just in terms of food price inflation. We need to be cognizant of the fact that it affects poor countries the most and the poor within those poor countries the most. Second or fourth one is trade, shipping, and supply chain disruption. It's not just energy, oil and gas. It's also other trade. So imports and exports, particularly for the Gulf countries and everybody within the Gulf. And of course, you've raised trade costs across the board. And this affects supply chains and disrupting supply chains across the region, and particularly in the Gulf countries. In terms of financial tightening, that's going on right now. And we don't know how long this will be. But one point I will make is that geopolitical risks are now need to be thought of as being permanent. They will go into interest rates. They will go into risk premia. So already risk premia have been rising. You'll have an impact from the trade shocks and the others on current accounts, capital accounts, borrowing costs for many of the countries in the region. The sixth impact, which we're seeing across the region, is, of course, tourism and remittances. Remittances are extremely important because many of them come from the bulk of remittances, say for a country like Lebanon, come from the Gulf. Many other countries are directly related to the Gulf and its remittances. So we're going to have an impact on all labor exporting countries. And my guess is, we don't have a number yet, but remittances will be declining as incomes decline or growth declines in the Gulf countries. The final and probably most important long-term is the impact on infrastructure. So we have power, ports, airports, water, desalination, telecoms have also been affected. And we'll need to think about how do we de-risk those. If you think about who is resilient and who is not in terms of countries, we know who those are. The least resilient are those who have been previously affected by conflict and fragile economies. Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq. Other countries are more resilient, Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt. And probably the most resilient, of course, are the most diversified economies, particularly in the Gulf, UAE and KSA, because they've got the fiscal buffers, and Oman, because they've got the fiscal buffers. They've diversified output and particularly diversified government revenue. And if you look on the right-hand side, you're thinking about which sectors are the least resilient. Obviously, tourism, shipping, aviation, and the like. More resilient is the public sector by and large. So employment there has been stable, telecoms, utilities, digital services. So if you look across the region, the impact on the region and also globally will depend really on your economic geography. So KSA, the Kingdom and UAE and Oman were spaced, did not have as much of an impact because of economic geography. They have access to the Gulf, and they have access to the Suez Canal. The main point I'd like to make, I think we need to think of, is two things. Geopolitical risks cannot be treated as rare. They are increasingly there. They need to be built into how we prepare monetary policy, fiscal policy, and macroeconomic policy in general. The second one is that you need permanent resilient systems for fiscal, for social, food, energy, and digital. These are all connected. So I have two slides on building resilience, and you'll notice that I'm looking much more at structural aspects of resilience. The first one is that power, food, water, and fertilizers security should really be part of macroeconomic policy. We cannot no longer think of macroeconomic policy, at least in our region, without thinking of security in those areas. A related point is that you've got to harden your critical infrastructure. We know what those are, but particularly I would point to the fact that if you look across the region where we're highly dependent on desalination, if you hit your power sector, you also hit your water, you hit your desalination, and it becomes an existential threat. So you've got to harden that critical infrastructure and protect it. More important, I think, over time, over the medium term, and it's starting already now, is you got to build east-west corridors. By that, I mean we've got to have pipelines that go into the Red Sea and elsewhere, into the Mediterranean and Turkey. We can no longer just think of passing through Straits of Hormuz. And that also means that you've got to reconfigure transport and logistics. So again, that means building roads, rail, and other aspects of any transport along from east to west, and avoid maritime choke points. You also have to build redundancy. You cannot be just focusing all your energy into certain pipelines. You've got to restore energy elsewhere, maybe in Egypt, Oman, Fujairah, or elsewhere. That's starting to happen. And also, when you think about how do I build resilience, it is on the trade side. And already we're seeing that there's a rerouting happening of trade through the CEPAs and the free trade association agreements. Second aspect of building resilience is in terms of energy, finance, defense, and social protection. It's very clear that those countries that were the most diversified were least affected. So one point I think is critical, and Dr. Rania I think mentioned that, and Jihad as well, is we need to focus a lot more on economic diversification and make sure that countries become increasingly diversified in terms of activity, in terms of trade, as well as in terms of government revenue, and a greater focus on the digital economy. You also have to diversify energy sources. Being just dependent on oil and gas makes you very vulnerable, as we've seen. So we need to have a shift towards renewable energy in a big way across the region, and we need to help countries in that. Renewable energy, such as solar, reduces your vulnerability and de-risks you. I won't focus a lot on the fiscal and the monetary and fiscal resilience packages. Jihad mentioned those. But I think one major point is that we need to move away from broad subsidies to have more targeted social subsidies and protection. And two things, we need to build regional institutions, whether it's the Arab Monetary Fund, ESCWA, and others, and have those be much more active than we've had in the past. And the final point I'm going to raise, which I think is critical as we move into the next period, is we're going to need to rethink defense spending and military spending. This is a big, of course, security shock. And what's going to happen is that countries will have to rethink their defense systems and military spending, which is going to likely to rise. But it cannot be military spending as we've had in the past. A major point here, I think, is that military technology has now changed massively. So you can no longer necessarily need missiles and all the rest. You can achieve massive results through drones, as we've seen. AI is playing an increasingly important role in terms of military systems. Cyber and autonomous assets and systems will become more prevalent. What this means is, I think, across the region, but particularly for the Gulf countries, is you're going to see massive investments in new defense assets and systems, which are more AI-driven and intelligent systems. What we'll need to make sure of is that that does not come at the expense of economic and social development. Already, UAE and Saudi will be localizing a lot of their defense production in the years to come to limit their exposure to foreign supply chains. The other point, and this is going to be across the region and maybe internationally, the militaries will have to reskill. You'll need to have military, which are tech operators, able to work with algorithmic warfare and systems, which is not the case at the moment. This is my final slide, just to say that we should think of what this crisis as a strategic opportunity. The main message, I think, to my mind, on the structural side, is that we need to redesign and de-risk infrastructure. Water, energy, transport, and digital need to be considered as strategic security assets, and they need to be de-risked and redesigned. Trade diversification, particularly for us, China and Asia are the main trade partners. That means that our trade agreements need to be shifting towards the east and no longer towards the west. And in particular, at a time at which you've had trade wars, we've become more vulnerable to sanctions and the like, and we need to de-risk. Energy pipelines have got to be there. That's going to be a massive investment. More land-based logistics corridors. And the final two things really is that we need a structural shift towards renewable energy systems across the region. That'll make you less vulnerable. But at the same time, it allows you to decentralize your power through solar plants and others that are distributed across the territory. And my final plea, as usual, is that regional cooperation has got to become operational. We always talk about regional cooperation, but we never see it happen. And my favorite one is to say we need a MENA bank for reconstruction and redevelopment, because there's been so much massive destruction across our region. We need to rebuild, reconstruct, but also redevelop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasser, for this intervention. Now, we have heard three complementary presentations, really. Rania gave us a broad perspective on, the crisis or the geopolitical crisis, and something about the impact, something about the response, something about how do you safeguard against future shocks. Then Jihad gave us a perspective that focuses more on the macroeconomic consequences, in particular inflation and fiscal stress and so on. And then Nasser came to us with the third leg of the story, which has to do with the real economy, the diversification, the energy. So in a way, it's almost like novels. In a novel, you have a beginning, you have a middle, and you have an end. And in this particular case, we had a broad perspective, a macro, short-run, essentially perspective, and then a long-run structural perspective. Now, it's your perspective that's going to add the fourth dimension to the three dimensions that you have just heard. So the floor is yours. Please, if you have any comments, please identify yourself. Make either the comment or raise a question that you want to make and address them to one of the panelists, if you don't mind. So who would like to start? Yes, sir. You came last, and you start with the first question. What is this? What kind? No, I'm kidding. This is the trick. So you haven't heard anything, but you still will ask the question.
No, I heard half of it.
You heard everything. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Please identify yourself.
This is Ahmed Aysan from Hamad bin Ali University from Qatar. Generally, we economists talk about more of the macro developments, but how about the wealth dimension? Most of the Gulf countries especially have huge wealth through their sovereign wealth funds. How do you perceive, especially to Dr. Rania, probably, how do you think that their strategy may change the course of action? Because this is not just about the flow, but it's about the stock. After this disruption, do you think that there will be some strategical change in terms of their investment? Because most of their investment actually goes to developed countries, to US, UK, and so on. And as Dr. Nasser Saidi has mentioned, probably also they will rethink about this dimension too. Do you think that there will be some, or it's a general question, so there could be some sort of a mentality and strategic shift there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The way I'm going to go about it is that I'm going to collect a few questions and then go to the panelists, and if we have the time, I'll go for another round of questions. So who else wants to? Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Asim Abu Hatab. I'm a professor in development economics at the Nordic Africa Institute in Uppsala, Sweden. I actually enjoyed the presentations, especially the last one. And my comment here has to do with the need for a broader understanding and analysis of resilience, because in our discussions, even in this room and generally in the MENA, we tend to focus, when it comes to external shocks and resilience, we tend to focus on the impact and recovery, how we can recover, how we can build ourselves after a crisis. This is very important. It's an essential part of the process, but it's just one part. I think from a research perspective and also policy, it's important to go beyond these two components, impact and recovery, and to integrate two important dimensions, which are the anticipation and preparedness. If we wait for a crisis, and if we start addressing resilience after a crisis has happened, then we actually, we risk here to start the process very late, the resilience cycle. The resilience cycle starts with the ability to anticipate, to get prepared, so this can actually reduce the cost and the consequences. And my question, or my kind of, the point that I want to make here in brief is that how can we integrate and include these two components in our resilience thinking, in our discussions and policies? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ragi, over here, please. Can someone move the microphone?
Yes, thank you for some very interesting interventions in a time of pretty pessimistic times. But the one very optimistic and positive point I heard today was the spur that this crisis is going to give for renewable energy, for us to double down on renewable energy. We had previously the climate change argument for renewable energy, didn't go that far. Then we had the cost argument for renewable energy, where renewable energy is actually competitive on cost basis. And now we have the resilience argument for renewable energy, that it is far more resilient than fossil-based energy sources. So I hope we take this as a really important signal to double down on investments and expand renewable energy dramatically in the region.
Thank you. Over there.
Good morning, everyone. Abir Shinnawi, the American University in Cairo. I want to ask the whole panel about what will happen if Iran imposes fees on ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. How will this affect the region, and what are the implications?
Thank you. I'm going to stop here and go for a quick response from our panelists, and then I'm going to come back to you for another round of comments. I will start in the same order. Rania, floor is yours.
Well, thank you.
You don't have to answer all the questions, just pick the ones that you like, and forget about the ones that you don't.
No, I'll try and be fair to everyone and at least give a bullet point on the questions. On the first one, with respect to the Gulf and the sovereign wealth funds, the Gulf have been very clear that these sovereign wealth funds are intergenerational. So they're anchored towards the future and what brings returns. And I think when we look throughout the investments, they've been ones particularly focused on frontier technologies, which is doing quite well. And Dr. Saidi had a slide on some of the technologies related to military and so forth. So I think their strategy is not necessarily short-term. There's a medium to long-term, and I think they're sticking to that in a large way. And we have to be very clear that despite going into this crisis with buffers, they've also suffered quite tremendously on the infrastructure, and this is going to require a lot of rebuilding. There was a question on resilience, and I totally agree. We need to have an analysis of what we need to be resilient about. But in my presentation, I had 8 Ds, or the D8s, which have to do with the data, which have to do with also the durability, which means that you need to put a country-led framework that takes into account not just what's happening in tranquil times, but in crisis times. So we can have a longer conversation on that, but I just want to refer the audience to that. Dr. Raghi is talking about renewable energy as one of the outcomes, but I want to say that we are doubling down from this crisis on more scope for regional work together. For instance, grids between countries. If we're talking about, and we have a lot of work in ESCWA about disaster recovery, sandstorms, there is an opportunity to be able, not just on a country level, but within combinations of countries, see more, and if there's a silver lining, even though it's a crisis which is quite dramatic, but at least there is scope there. With respect to Abir and the Iran and fees, I think this is a very dicey international trade question. And it's, from what we are seeing, it's very difficult to see that the international community, especially when it comes to water passages, which are supposed to be, given the international agreements, I think, the verdict is still out, and I'm not so sure that they will be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jihad.
Very much. Few comments from my side. I think my overarching comment, this crisis is revealing progressively its impact. We are at the beginning of one of the largest transformations that our region will go through for the next 50 years. Therefore, my first comment is related to the question of financial resilience. I think what this crisis has revealed that the existence of also other type of buffers. Of course, GCC countries have built buffers, and they use some of those buffers in order to diversify outside oil. They have used also part of their buffers for their long-term financial sustainability. But in certain cases, we saw that there are new type of resilience that can be created through the infrastructure buffers. I think Nasser mentioned in his presentation few examples of that. Therefore, we will see more of this. We will see also a new approach to address the diversification strategy, including on the fiscal side. This is the first comment I have. The second comment is related to what Raja has raised, which I fully agree with. I think also we are going to see an acceleration of energy transition for various objectives, for various reasons, and it will start also from the countries who are on the demand side. What this crisis has revealed that the most affected countries in this crisis are the Asian countries. 70% of the export of the region is going to Asia and equivalent amount of import. Therefore, Asia became or has been revealed as the most strategic partner economically in the region. And I would suspect that over the next few months, years, we will see more strategic dialogue between the region and Asia. Also, the acceleration in terms of energy transition will happen. And I see also some of the countries in the region playing a role in that. UAE with ADNOC, Aramco, and others are also accelerating their investment in renewable energy. The third question is preparedness before shocks. I think it's a very important question. And here, in fact, we keep always coming back to the basics. Building buffers and increasing the institutional capacity to respond to shock, differentiate countries when they are faced with risks. Clearly, as I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, 5 shocks in 5 years, it's not something usual we have. And therefore, we need also to reflect on how these successive shocks have changed the region. They have changed the region in terms of impact on trade, this is for sure, impact on connectivity, this is for sure, and risks of erosion of inclusion, which I think we did not, because of the focus of this session, discuss enough, but this is, I think it's an important dimension. Social protection, job creation, especially with the acceleration that we are seeing with AI, that the adoption is accelerating also in the region. We have 3 countries who have already among the most ready worldwide, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi. Therefore, this is also a new dimension that I hope during your discussion today and tomorrow, you will reflect on, because it has impact on trade, it has impact on labor, it has also impact on energy. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Jihad. Nasser?
Let me start off with the sovereign wealth funds. I spend a lot of my time in the UAE. What I'm seeing from the sovereign wealth funds is that they're going to turn more inwards. It's more towards greater localization of production, more investment locally at the expense of foreign investment, except maybe for one area, which is digital AI, data centers and the like, because we still have to import the technology. So I think in the years to come, you'll have a redirection of sovereign wealth funds towards greater domestic investment, which is the way it should be, given the shocks that they've faced. And I want to come back to the point about policy. Structural policy has now come to the fore. We need to think differently. It's not just monetary and fiscal policy and buffers. We need to think about structural policies and how do we implement them. And that's why I focused a lot on infrastructure, because we've had a massive infrastructure shock, and you're going to have to redesign and reconfigure your infrastructure. It's energy, transport, power, you name it. And that's going to be a massive shift. And that we're going to have to be massive investments made in the region. And that will be driven as well by the sovereign wealth funds and state-owned enterprises, government-related enterprises. And let's remember that in the Gulf countries, they have some really multinational corporations. Jihad mentioned Masdar and others, Enoch, ADNOC, and the rest. Those will come to the fore. And the related point, of course, is renewable energy. And renewable energy, not just because you're de-risking yourself, but also because we haven't had the chance to talk about it, is because climate risks are already upon us. we are the most climate-stressed region in the world. And you need to think about solar and water together. And again, we're the most water-stressed. So in the years to come, not only do we need to shift towards more solar, but also probably more towards desalination and de-risking those two. So I think in the years to come, policy has to be thought of differently. And the final one, I think, is that we've learned that core infrastructure is part of security. You can no longer design infrastructure without thinking about how you defend it, how you make it safe, how you make it resilient, and how it builds into your policy. So security and geopolitical risks are rising risks, and that's going to be something that we as economists are going to have to learn much more about than we have in the past.
Thank you, Nasser. Let me, I have been looking this side, but not this side. So I'll keep you last, Ishaq, but let me go to Hassan. Oh God, there are so many. Well, make it very brief. Hassan, don't give us a speech. Please ask a question. Over here, please. Over here. No. Over here, please. I'll come to you at the end, Ishaq.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I enjoyed the panel. I just want to congratulate Hiba for her tremendous effort. And thank you once again for coming back to help us when there was a need, as usual. The question is for this slide that I still remember that has the 8 channels of transmission that has been put, I believe, by Jihad. My first impression that all of the channels are probably the direct physical impact, starting with infrastructure and then going into the logistics of trade and so on. And there was no transmission that has impact on the human capital. And I believe the impact on the human capital is probably the longer run and the one that is indirectly impact the whole society in this case. In any conflict like this, if it is prolonged, there will be immigration of human capital. If the institutions are being shaken, there will be a move to informal sectors. So all of these probably might be need to take into consideration. This is my comment just for the sake of clarifying it. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you. I'll go for the gentleman at the end, and then you, sir, and then I'll go to Ishaq, and I am done. Over there, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And my question is very brief.
Now, please identify yourself.
Salah Abu Sidra with the Libyan International University. Very pleased to be here. Given the current condition, should we be taking into account the future damage and shock, which might be much more severe and much more intense than what we've seen so far? I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but just the possibility of something much bigger than what we've seen does occur. Are we taking this into account, or shall we be taking this into account?
Thank you. Over here, please.
My name is Asil Mehmah, Economic Advisor at the Minister of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the amazing presentations and discussion. So I have one question. So after the COVID, we talked about nationalism. And then after the Russian-Ukrainian war, we talk about friendshoring, onshoring. Then after the Trump tariffs, we talked about trade fragmentation. So now we are in the middle of a new crisis in the region. So how do you see the next coming period or the new world that we will create? Globalization, I don't know.
All right.
Thank you very much.
That's a good question. Tell us what the future holds for us. Ishaq. Welcome, Ishaq.
Thank you, thank you.
And Nisreen and Tariq.
It's so pleasant, first of all, to be in such company and to know that ERF is back at such an important moment, and that we have a new leadership, a new board, we're back in business. I hope ERF can now attract funding and direct it to research and reinvigorate research in the region. It's such, as you all said, an important moment for us to become much more active. Now, just one comment and a question to all of us. I mean, it's very good to hear about recommendations about, you know, increasing diversification, increasing productivity, the importance of structural change. Now, let's just remind ourselves that we've been saying that for the past 20 years, probably. And so, is it, obviously, you know, we have to do research based on evidence, but we should not ignore that this is a region with political dominance. Let's not ignore the role of politics and the political economy of the kind of things we're talking about. There is a risk of just technocratic stopping that. You know, political economies potentially, you know, win-win, and how to build reform coalitions, and why this time is different, or the risk of social explosion, whatever it is. I think we need to figure out, going forward, in which ways can actually be really helpful by not closing our eyes to the complexities of the region, especially at this particular time. This question for all of us for, you know, the next couple of days: how do we actually approach these issues in our research?
Thank you, Ishaq. Always bringing in the bad news. No, I actually think that you are making a very serious comment, and I would like to comment on it at one point. Let me go back to our panelists, and I will start this time in reverse order. So I'll start with you, Nasser, and I will add Ra'id to the people who are going to comment. Nasser, the floor is yours.
Look, I and others have lived nothing but war in nearly all our life. I've lived through 5 different wars, yeah? More than 55 years, nearly 60 years now, of just war, since I was in high school. What do we learn from all that? We learned from all that, I think, that we as economists have an important role to play, but typically, in many cases, our voice is not heard. When you talk about the politics, and in particular the geopolitics and geostrategic risks which are rising around us, I find that governments in our region simply very rarely think about the economic dimensions. So I think in many ways, I want to say that we as an intelligentsia for the region have not faced up to the challenges. So I think we need to be much more proactive in terms of the implications of security, geopolitical risks, geostrategic risks for the economies of our region. We need to be much more vocal. We are not, and we need to be involved at the table. Second point I want to make is that where are we heading? I think we need to head towards much more digital in all our activities. Digital government in all its various dimensions, digital revenues, digital spending to reach for social safety nets and the like. And probably most of all is just make sure that we join the digital economy, which is unfolding, which means massive investments in AI and related. So that, I think, is a major challenge because we haven't really addressed it yet. I can see the positive aspects living in the UAE, massive investments being made, but it also means that we need to rethink our educational curricula. There was a question being asked about human capital, and if there's one aspect of human capital where we need to invest much more in, is its digital human capital capacity. So reskilling and revising all our educational curricula, starting with elementary school and kindergarten, should be on the cards. You need to learn from what's happening in China, above all, in my mind, to my mind. China, Japan, Korea have really rethought their educational systems. We need to do the same if we are to survive in the years to come.
Thank you very much, Nasser. Jihad.
Thank you. Those are very interesting questions. The session was a kind of the start of a deeper discussion because it focused on understanding the shock and the ramification of the shock. Well, I think we all recognize that this crisis is not similar to what we saw in the past, at least, even if we have been in the last 3-4 decades in a very active geopolitical tensions. This one is a transformative one. And although maybe in the short term, it's showing high level of asymmetry, centralized or focused in certain number of countries and leaving the others indirectly affected, but it's a transformative one. And I fully agree, it's an opportunity to discuss certain number of issues that were there in the past, maybe not well addressed, but are still with us. Failing in the past of addressing the long-term consequences of shocks led us to see a reverberation of those. And some of the events we saw, in fact, were a response to original shocks. The second point I would like to make, we are at the moment of acceleration of history. Technology, AI is accelerating the pace of investment, the way we work. And I think it's very important for the region to have the well-balanced strategy of investment, not to put all the investment in building resilience, building walls, but also finding new frameworks of cooperation that will allow us not to be delayed by that in the transformative investments that are needed for the future. And three, I think it's also something that many have raised. It's the coherence of the pillars that makes any policy successful. Of course, in the management of the short term, you look at the key macro dimensions, but those are only the starting point. And I think what we have been hearing from the audience today is the need to build a new framework of thinking, where even regional cooperation has to be put on the table again in a different way or a different form. Therefore, I think you're having your conference at the exact right time with the highest level of uncertainty, but it's a turning point that one should regroup and think. And the audience here is filled with talents and experts who would, I'm sure, and I would have loved to be with you those 2 days, will come up with very interesting thought-provoking ideas that the region needs for the future.
Thank you. Rania.
Well, thank you very much. Maybe 2 points to make at the outset. First, Dr. Ahmed, you did a great job in putting us in order and channeling our thinking around those 3 questions.
I don't know whether
so
I succeeded.
The success of this panel really attests to your ability to convene this in an analytical and really practical way. The second point, I'm very lucky, and I want to join both Dr. Saidi and Jihad by saying that this conference is coming at a very important point, and especially for me, as I'm putting an agenda for a regional institution that will also leverage on everybody in the region and every researcher and policymaker and mind in the region. So I'm very fortunate and happy for that. The human capital element, and I think in my intervention, I said that there's the visible scarring, which is the displacement, the refugees question, etc. And there's the invisible, and the invisible has to do with the years of schooling which are being cut off. The UNDP has a recent analysis on the Human Development Index in Lebanon after latest events and how it's retracting. So you're absolutely correct. That is, macroeconomic stability is a necessary condition, but it is not sufficient to move us forward in many instances, and that's where structural reforms, particularly on the human element, is required. And I bring in AI here because AI and absolutely, as both my co-panelists mentioned, when we look at the region, and I want to congratulate Saudi Arabia, and we have the representative from the Ministry of Planning here from Saudi Arabia. They have invested in Arabic LLMs, which is extremely important. Imagine this region with the youth if they are able to use AI tools, which also have the Arabic language. So I think here, when we talk about sovereignty, there's also an element of AI which is very important, and I look forward to furthering what we have been doing as ESCWA in this field, but also ask ourselves the question, it's not just about the investment, it's where this productivity goes. How does the individual in the region become more productive by using this? The other element about the New World Order, I think there was that question. I think it's the New World Order is one, as I mentioned, the new normal is uncertainty and non-linearity. We're not going to escape that. You know, the days of a linear response, and if there's a shock, fiscal should do this way, monetary should do this way. You know, I mean, I just take the US as an example, but look at the dichotomy between, what's happening on the equity markets and what's happening on the bond market. So all what we have been trained to think as outcomes is really being shaken. And this is why more discussions amongst ourselves in the region is important. I conclude by Dr. Diwan, and it's always, bringing an extra dimension. And that is that we need to have, everybody knows I love the word narrative. So we need to really have a regional narrative related to what's going on, and agency for not just the outcome of policy, but also in the design. So I look forward also to seeing how together collectively we can provide that regional narrative, which is going to again address some of those points. But very happy that I'm here, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Rania has done a narrative for Egypt now. She moved to ESCWA. I am sure we're going to have a regional narrative. But before that, right.
Thank you.
Our new managing director is going to tell us what he wants to say.
No, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to answer Abir. Abir, whether the fees will be imposed or not imposed. The imperative remains what? That in today's world, we need to build the resilience. So irrespective of the fees, redundancies will be built within the GCC, right? I mean, see what has happened now, and then draw the lesson. And this is the resilience agenda. The resilience agenda, and Jihad and Nasser and Rania, all of them mentioned it, right? You go for redundancy rather than just a quest for efficiency. And that is the resilience, the way we understand it, and you explained it, right? So the first thing is you absorb a shock. The second stage, you try to adapt to a shock, and then you transform. The agenda, that the policy recommendations that we've heard, is about transformation. Transformation so that, a shock that happens in the future, and we've all agreed, all the panelists agreed, we are no longer in a cyclical shock, we are in a structural shock. So we have to live with a continuous shock events, if you will. And for that, you need to build resilience. So resilience is part and parcel of economic development. Growth in itself will not suffice. It will be a growth with resilience.
Thank you, Raed. I mean, I think I'm doing exactly what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to take 10 more minutes beyond our time because we started 10 minutes late. Now, in the 1 minute that's remaining, I want to do two things. One, I want to address the point that Isha has made, because it's a very serious point. The point is, for a very long period of time, we have been talking about the same kind of technical solutions, meaning on the, you need to diversify, you need to fix your macroeconomic policies, you need to be resilient, you need to transition. Anyway, we have been saying all these almost like economists when they maximize and they reach the optimum solution sort of thing. But the trouble is, nobody is buying it. So you guys can come up with the best solutions, evidence-based, and you do your econometrics and you get your peer reviewers, they beat you up, you fix. At the end of the day, you have the perfect solution. Go and give it to somebody. They don't listen to you. They turn to the other side. Why? Because of political feasibility, desirability, credibility, whatever you name it. The line of thinking that tend to be lost in the process of thinking about how to deal with a problem is the political angle of the solutions, not just the technical solution, because all of the work that we do is essentially about technicalities. It's about how do you solve a problem, whether it's in the trade or labor or anything else. The problem is that all these solutions go to politicians. Politicians have their own calculus. They have nothing to do with you. They have everything to do with them. And if you don't understand the way they think, you will work day and night and nothing much is going to happen. So bottom line is what? Bottom line is, Isha and I, when I was a managing director a long time ago, we started a stream of work that's called the political economy of transformation. I think that's what it was called, Isha. And I think some very interesting work came out during that time. I would invite our new managing director to consider the issue of the political and economic transformation as one of the areas that we either need to mainstream or even take it as a focus area, focus line of work. That was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is that I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank you for a very good opening session. And by the way, this is not the end of the story, this is the beginning of a story. We have just begun to talk about the crisis. The next two plenaries are going to be continuation of the same, slightly from different angles. So hold your horses. Just join me in thanking these guys.
Thank you.